Of all the things I've held in my life, I never thought a single carved wooden box would feel heavier than the truth. This is a true story, something that happened to me, and it started with the smooth, polished weight of that box in my hands. The scent of roasted turkey and my mother's sage stuffing hung thick in the air, a warm blanket meant to signify comfort, family, and gratitude. But as my sister Amelia lifted the mahogany music box I'd spent 200 hours carving, her manicured fingers tracing the inlaid maple leaves on the lid, the air in the crowded dining room turned sharp and cold. She held it up for our whole family to see, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips as she caught my eye. "It's just so lovely what people can do when they have so much free time on their hands," she announced, her voice dripping with condescension that was as polished as her pearl earrings. "A toast," she said, raising her wine glass. "To Clara for embracing the stay-at-home life after her little setback at work. We're all so proud of your hobbies. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." The little setback Amelia referred to was a corporate restructuring at a Portland-based ad agency that had vaporized my entire creative department 3 months earlier. I wasn't just a casualty, I was gutted. For 10 years, I'd poured my soul into graphic design, climbing the ladder to a senior art director role, only to be told a spreadsheet had declared my existence redundant. I was 34, burned out, and suddenly untethered from the only identity I'd ever known. So, I didn't immediately jump back into the soulless grind of interviews and corporate jargon. Instead, I retreated. I found solace in the scent of sawdust and the patient rhythm of a gouge shaping a block of wood, a craft my grandfather had taught me in his dusty garage in Selwood when I was a kid. He'd left me his tools, and in my small apartment in the Hawthorne district, I turned my spare bedroom into a workshop. It was my therapy. The focused work of carving, sanding, and finishing quieted the anxious noise in my head. My sister, Amelia, existed in a different universe. 2 years older, she was a high-powered marketing VP for a biotech firm headquartered in the U.S. Bancorp Tower, Portland's iconic Big Pink. She lived in a sterile, glass-walled condo in the Pearl District with her equally ambitious fiancé, Mark, a corporate lawyer whose jaw seemed permanently clenched. Amelia's life was a curated feed of success: charity galas, promotions, Peloton milestones, and weekend trips to the Oregon coast that looked more like photo shoots than actual relaxation. Her definition of value was written in quarterly reports and salary brackets. To her, my retreat into woodworking wasn't a healing process. It was a regression, a failure. When I decided to turn my passion into a business, opening an Etsy shop I called Hawthorne Handcrafts, her support was laced with poison. "Oh, that's cute, Clara," she'd said, scrolling through my first listings on her phone with a dismissive flick of her thumb. "Are you sure this is a sustainable path? It seems more like a hobby. People don't really buy things like this anymore, do they?" That Thanksgiving was the first time she'd aired her judgment so publicly. The music box was supposed to be a peace offering, a gift for our mother to replace an old one that had broken. It was the most complex piece I'd ever made, with delicate, interlocking gears I'd designed myself, and it played a simple, haunting rendition of Greensleeves. As Amelia's toast landed, the silence from my parents was deafening. My father cleared his throat and studied his mashed potatoes with intense interest. My mother offered a tight, pained smile. The rest of our family, aunts, uncles, cousins, shifted uncomfortably. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck. I felt small, childish, and pathetic. My craft, my sanctuary, had been twisted into a symbol of my failure. Mark, Amelia's fiancé, smirked into his wine glass. "Well, somebody has to keep the artisan spirit alive," he said, the words slithering out with false sincerity. After dinner, as I was helping clear the table, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Honey, don't listen to her," she whispered, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "She's just, you know how she is. She's proud of her career, and she just wants you to be successful too." That was the problem. They had all bought into Amelia's definition of success. My path wasn't just different, it was wrong. That night, I drove back to my apartment with the beautiful, silent music box sitting on the passenger seat. My mother had insisted Amelia was just teasing and that I should leave it, but I couldn't. It felt tainted. Back in my workshop, surrounded by the comforting scent of cedar and walnut, I felt a new resolve hardening in my chest. It wasn't just about proving her wrong anymore. This was a war she had just declared, and I had no choice but to fight back with the only weapons I had. My hands, my tools, and a patience she could never comprehend. The first few months were a quiet grind. I poured every ounce of my frustration and hurt into my work. I created a whole collection of small, intricate memory boxes, each with a unique carving on the lid. A ship in a bottle, a sleeping fox, a constellation map. Sales were slow but steady. A trickle of 5-star reviews came in, little jolts of validation that kept me going. I used my graphic design background to build a clean, professional brand identity and took beautiful photos of my products, staging them with moss and ferns from Forest Park. Then the first weird review appeared. It was for one of my best-selling items, a small cedar box carved with a mountain scene inspired by Mount Hood. The review was 1 star. The username was PDXShopper123. The text read, "Disappointed. The box is much smaller than it looks in the pictures, and it arrived smelling strongly of turpentine, which I'm highly allergic to. Had to throw it out. Waste of money." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I never used turpentine. I used a low-odor, all-natural tongue oil finish precisely because it was non-toxic. And the dimensions were listed clearly, down to the millimeter. I remembered a conversation from a few weeks prior. Amelia had dropped by my apartment unannounced, a rare occurrence. She'd wrinkled her nose the moment she stepped inside. "God, Clara, what is that smell? It's giving me a headache. It smells like paint thinner or something." It was the tongue oil. I had just finished a batch of orders. The connection was thin, a whisper of a suspicion, but it was there. I reported the review to Etsy, explaining that it was factually incorrect, but the automated reply said it didn't violate their policies. The 1-star rating sat there like a stain on my otherwise perfect record. A week later, another one appeared. This time on a different product, a set of carved wooden coasters. The username was Rose City Reviewer. Sloppy craftsmanship. The edges are rough and one of the coasters is warped. Clearly an amateur at work. You can find better quality at Target. 1 star. This was a blatant lie. My entire process was built around precision. I spent hours sanding every piece to a silky finish. I checked every item for flatness on a granite block before shipping. But the most chilling part was the language. Amateur. It was Amelia's favorite subtle insult, the word she'd used when I first showed her my portfolio out of college. It was her voice, wrapped in the anonymity of the internet. The suspicion was no longer a whisper, it was a scream. I started looking for patterns, falling down a rabbit hole of digital paranoia. I couldn't prove anything, but the feeling of being watched, of being sabotaged, was suffocating. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place at a family barbecue for the 4th of July. I was sitting on the patio, and Amelia was inside, talking on the phone in the kitchen, her voice a low murmur. I only caught a snippet as she walked past the open sliding door. "I'm just worried about her, Aunt Carol," she was saying, her tone oozing with manufactured concern. "She barely leaves that dusty apartment. Mark and I keep inviting her out, but she just wants to be alone with her projects. It's not healthy. I think the layoff hit her harder than she's letting on." My blood ran cold. She was painting a picture of me as a fragile, depressed recluse. She wasn't just attacking my business. She was attacking my character, my sanity, to the very people who were supposed to be my support system. This was calculated. This was cruel. She was isolating me, ensuring that if I ever cried foul, I'd sound like the unstable, paranoid artist she was making me out to be. My hands were trembling as I gripped my bottle of beer. I looked across the yard at her, laughing with Mark, the perfect picture of success. She seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Her words were subtle, her attacks deniable. How could I fight a ghost? The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but then it curdled into something else. A cold, hard anger. She thought she was untouchable. She thought my little hobby was a joke. She had no idea that the same focus it took to carve a delicate bird's wing from a block of unforgiving oak was now entirely fixed on her. The war wasn't just about my business anymore. It was about taking back my life, my story, from the person who was trying to burn it to the ground. And I would do it one meticulous, patient, deliberate cut at a time. The weeks that followed were a study in contrasts. On the surface, I was the quiet, focused artisan. I'd nod along during my mother's weekly check-in calls, listening to her gush about Amelia's latest triumph. A new account landed, a feature in a Portland business journal, the ridiculously extravagant venue they'd booked for the engagement party. It's at the Portland Art Museum, Clara. Can you believe it? So elegant. I'd murmur my congratulations, all the while sitting in my workshop, sketching out a battle plan. Amelia's power was her image. The polished, successful, caring older sister who had her life perfectly under control. Her career, her relationship, her social standing. It was all a fortress she'd built brick by perfect brick. To the world, and especially to our family, she was a shining example. I was the cautionary tale. The flaky artist, the struggling creative who couldn't handle the real world. Every condescending, "How's the little shop going?" was a reminder of my station in the family hierarchy. Her sabotage had been effective. My sales had plateaued. The bad reviews, though few, were enough to deter new customers. My confidence was shot. Every time I packed an order, a sliver of fear entered my heart. Would this be the one that got a 1-star review from Oregon Trailblazer 45 complaining about a fictional splinter? The turning point, the moment the last of my fear burned away and was replaced by pure, cold resolve, came not from a bad review, but from a phone call. I'd been in talks with a small, highly respected boutique in the Alberta Arts District called the Wildwood Gallery. The owner, a woman named Sarah, loved my work and wanted to place a significant wholesale order, enough to cover my rent for 6 months. It was the break I'd been dreaming of. We'd had 3 positive meetings, and she was supposed to send over the purchase order. Instead, she called. Her voice was awkward, apologetic. "Clara, hi. Listen, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to hold off on that order," she said. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Oh," I managed my voice small. "Was it the pricing?" No, the pricing was fine," she said quickly. "It's just, I heard some concerning things. From a source I trust. About production reliability and, well, some personal issues that might affect your ability to deliver on time." Personal issues? Production reliability? I had never missed a single shipping deadline. "Sarah, who did you talk to?" I asked, my voice shaking with a sudden, sickening realization. I'm really not at liberty to say," she stammered. "But it was someone who seemed to know you very well, who sounded genuinely concerned for you." "I'm sorry, Clara. Maybe in the future." She hung up. I stood in the middle of my workshop, the scent of cedarwood now feeling like funeral incense. Someone who seemed to know you very well. Someone genuinely concerned. There was only one person on earth who fit that description. Amelia hadn't just left a bad review. She had picked up the phone and professionally, methodically, destroyed my single biggest opportunity. She'd used her silver-tongued corporate skills to assassinate my reputation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked over to the workbench my grandfather had built, the surface scarred with the marks of 60 years of creation, and I laid my hands flat on the cool wood. I looked at his old tools hanging in their neat rows on the pegboard. The chisels, the gouges, the hand planes. They were tools of creation, of patience, of bringing beauty out of a raw, unformed block. But in that moment, I realized they could also be tools of deconstruction. I would dismantle my sister's life with the same precision I used to carve a dovetail joint. She thought my art was my weakness, a frivolous hobby. I would make it my weapon. The plan began to form, not in a flash of inspiration, but slowly, deliberately, like a piece of wood taking shape under my hands. I knew I couldn't beat her in her world of boardrooms and power lunches. I had to draw her into mine. A world of symbolism, storytelling, and hidden meanings. A world she was too arrogant to ever understand. My first move was strategic deference. At our next family dinner, I apologized to Amelia. I told her she was right, that I'd been letting my hobby consume me and that I was feeling lost. I watched her soak it in, her expression a perfect blend of pity and self-satisfaction. "It's okay, sweetie," she said, patting my hand. "We just want what's best for you." Then I played my first card. "Your engagement party," I said, looking up at her with what I hoped were wide, earnest eyes. "I know it's a huge deal, and I want to contribute something special. I want to make a one-of-a-kind box for you and Mark. A custom piece. My masterpiece." Amelia's eyes lit up. A custom, handcrafted piece by her artisan sister to be displayed at her high society engagement party? It was a perfect prop for the narrative she was building. The story of the successful sister benevolently supporting her struggling, but occasionally talented sibling. "Clara, I would love that," she gushed, loud enough for our parents to hear. "That is so thoughtful." She had taken the bait. Over the next 2 months, while she was busy with cake tastings and seating charts, bragging to everyone about the priceless gift her sister was making for her, I went to war. My campaign had 2 fronts. The first was digital. I took every penny I had and invested it in online marketing courses. I devoured information on SEO, social media algorithms, and content strategy. I rebranded. Hawthorne Handcrafts was no longer just a shop. It was a story. I started an Instagram and a TikTok account, not just posting glossy photos of my finished products, but showing the process. The raw wood, the flying chips, the patient sanding. I told stories about where the wood came from: a fallen maple from a friend's yard, reclaimed fir from a historic Portland building. I talked about what inspired each piece. People didn't just want to buy a box, they wanted to buy a piece of a story. And it worked. An influential design blogger from Seattle discovered my TikTok, and a video of me carving a tiny, intricate fox went viral. It hit 1 million views in 3 days. The effect was instantaneous. My Etsy shop exploded. Orders poured in from all over the country, then from Canada, the UK, Australia. I had to stop taking custom requests. I was working 16-hour days, my hands were raw, but my bank account was growing. I set up a spreadsheet, separate from my business accounting. This one had only 2 columns: my net income and Amelia's estimated salary. I updated it weekly. The second front of my war was far more dangerous: intelligence. I started digging into Amelia's perfect career. I remembered her bragging a year ago about a cutthroat campaign she ran for a new pharmaceutical product, a campaign that won her the VP promotion. She'd laughed about how she'd outmaneuvered a junior colleague to get the project. I started with a name, David Chun. He was listed on Amelia's LinkedIn as having worked in her department before leaving the company shortly after her promotion. It took me a week to find his new contact information. Posing as a graduate student from Portland State University, writing a thesis on marketing ethics, I reached out to him for an informational interview. He was hesitant at first, but I was persuasive. We met for coffee at a Stumptown on Belmont. I listened for an hour as he talked vaguely about his career. Then I took a risk. "I'm focusing my thesis on a campaign for a drug called Seralife," I said, naming the product from Amelia's big win. David Chun froze. His face went pale. And then the story poured out of him. The campaign had been his brainchild. The concept, the research, the initial pitch, all of it. Amelia had been his direct supervisor. She had praised his work, then systematically stole it, presenting it as her own in high-level meetings he wasn't invited to. When he tried to protest, she buried him in administrative work and gave him a scathing performance review that effectively forced him out. He'd signed an NDA and was terrified of her, but the injustice still ate at him. "She's a shark," he said, his voice low and bitter. "She'll smile right at you while she's bleeding you dry." I asked him if he had any proof. He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. He had the original concept documents, the emails with timestamps, the metadata. All of it, saved on a personal hard drive. He had kept it as insurance, but had been too scared to ever use it. "What would you do with it?" he asked, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. I looked at him, the face of my sister's ambition, another piece of discarded material on her climb to the top. "I'm not a graduate student," I said softly. "My name is Clara Evans. Amelia is my sister. And I'm going to give you a platform to tell your story." He stared at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of a fighting spirit in his eyes. He didn't know the details of my plan, but he knew I was offering him a chance at justice. The final piece was in place. All while this was happening, I was working on the box. The engagement gift. Amelia would call me every few days for an update. "How's my masterpiece coming along?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with smug ownership. "It's going to be the centerpiece of the gift table." "It's taking time," I'd reply, my voice calm and steady. "I want it to be perfect. I want it to tell a story. Oh, and it would tell a story. It would be the most honest thing I had ever made." I chose a block of the deepest, richest mahogany, and for the inlay on the lid, I used pale, shimmering sycamore to carve a single, perfect peony, her favorite flower. It was beautiful, flawless, a reflection of the perfect image she showed the world. But the real story was being carved on the inside. The night of the engagement party was classic Portland. A fine mist slicked the streets, and the lights of the city blurred into a watercolor painting. The Portland Art Museum's Crydell Grand Ballroom was a world away from my dusty workshop. It was all soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and the low hum of 100 of Portland's elite making conversation over champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Amelia was radiant, a queen in her court, draped in a silk dress the color of money. She and Mark moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, their smiles as bright and hard as diamonds. I felt like an imposter in my simple black dress, a ghost haunting the edges of the celebration. I found the gift table and placed the box in the center, exactly where Amelia had instructed. It sat there under the soft lights, the polished peony on its lid seeming to glow. It looked innocent, beautiful. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over me. This was my sister. This was a line I could never uncross. Then I saw her across the room, laughing with her boss, and I remembered the dead tone in Sarah's voice from the gallery, the defeated look in David Chen's eyes. This wasn't just for me. My resolve hardened like resin. After the toasts from the fathers and the best man, Amelia took the microphone. "Thank you all so much for coming," she began, beaming. "Mark and I are just so overwhelmed with all the love in this room tonight." She went on, thanking her friends, her future in-laws, and then her eyes found me. "And I want to give a special thank you to my little sister, Clara. As many of you know, she's a wonderfully talented artist, and she's been pouring her heart into a very special gift for us. Clara, would you come up and present it? I've told everyone so much about it." A smattering of polite applause followed me as I walked to the front of the room. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Amelia handed me the microphone and gestured to the box with a proprietary air. "Don't be shy," she whispered, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Tell them all about your masterpiece." I took a deep breath. This was it. I picked up the box. It felt impossibly heavy. "Thank you, Amelia," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My sister is right. I have been pouring my heart into this. Art for me has always been about telling a story. Sometimes the most beautiful objects tell the most painful truths." I held the box up, showing the room the exquisite peony. On the outside, this is the peony. It represents beauty, success, and admiration. It's everything we're taught to strive for. Amelia was nodding, a smug, satisfied look on her face. Then, with a deliberate slowness, I opened the lid. A soft, melancholy melody began to play from the hidden music box mechanism. A tune I'd composed myself. The room fell silent. Inside, there was no velvet lining, no romantic silhouette of a couple. Instead, there was a series of intricate, carved wooden panels. The first panel showed two little girls playing by an old oak tree. The second showed the taller girl boosting the smaller one up into the branches. The third and final panel showed the taller girl standing on the ground, looking up with a cold expression as she shakes the branch, causing the smaller girl to lose her grip and fall. The carvings were detailed, their faces unmistakably me and Amelia as children, a scene from a half-forgotten memory where she'd done exactly that, leaving me with a sprained wrist and a first bitter taste of her casual cruelty. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Amelia's smile faltered, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "This story," I continued, my voice clear and calm, projecting through the microphone, "is called The Peony and the Willow. It's a fable about a beautiful flower that grows so jealous of a quiet, steady tree that it tries to poison its roots so it can have all the sunlight for itself." I looked directly at Amelia. Her face was draining of all color. "I've discovered that my art is my truth. And tonight, I'm launching a new permanent collection on my Hawthorne Handcrafts store. It's called the Fable Collection. Each piece tells a story of a hidden truth." As I spoke those words, a pre-scheduled post went live on my Instagram, my TikTok, and my blog, which now had tens of thousands of followers. The post was titled The Fable of the Portland Peony, and it laid out the entire story without ever using her name. It told of the sabotage, the fake one-star reviews, the lies spread to family. It included screenshots of the fake Pinterest account, Portland Peony 88, with its nasty comments. It was all deniable, but for the 100 people in that room, our family, her friends, her colleagues, it was a confession. But I wasn't done. "True success isn't about climbing a ladder," I said, my gaze sweeping over the stunned faces in the crowd. "It's about having the integrity to be happy for others, not sabotaging them out of your own insecurity." At that exact moment, across town, David Chen hit post on a meticulously documented article on LinkedIn, detailing the theft of his intellectual property by a prominent Portland marketing executive, tagging their former company and several industry publications. And for my final act, I turned to the large projector screen that had been cycling through photos of the happy couple. I clicked a button on the small remote in my hand. The photos vanished, replaced by a clean, simple screenshot of my business's financial dashboard. It showed my sales figures, my expenses, and at the bottom, highlighted in green, was a single number: my net profit for the last 6 months. "You called my work a little hobby, Amelia," I said, my voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, yet it carried through the cavernous, silent room. "You called me lazy. You told our family I was failing. So I just want to thank you. Your cruelty was the best marketing campaign I could have ever asked for. As of this last quarter, my little hobby is now earning more than your corporate salary." The number on the screen confirmed it. It was undeniable. I placed the music box back on the table, the sad little song still playing, a soundtrack to the utter destruction of my sister's world. I saw it all in a flash. Her boss's narrowed eyes, her future mother-in-law's look of horror, and Mark, her fiancé, staring at her as if he'd never seen her before in his life. The beautiful peony had been ripped out of the ground, its poisoned roots exposed for all to see. I didn't need to say another word. I turned, walked off the stage, and moved through the silent, parted crowd without looking back. Months have passed since that night. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, at least for Amelia. David Chen's LinkedIn post, corroborated by my viral fable, triggered an internal investigation at her company. She was fired within a week. Mark, her fiancé, called off the engagement a few days after that, his ambition apparently not extending to being tethered to a social and professional pariah. I heard from an aunt that Amelia sold her condo in the Pearl District and moved. No one seems to know where. My parents called me once, their voices a mixture of confusion and anger. "How could you do that to your own sister?" my father had asked. "It was a family matter," my mother had cried. I told them that Amelia had stopped treating me like family a long time ago, and that I had simply decided to agree with her. They haven't called back. My life, in contrast, has blossomed. Hawthorne Handcrafts is no longer a one-woman show in a spare bedroom. I have a large, light-filled workshop in an old industrial building in southeast Portland, with 2 full-time employees who share my passion for the craft. The Fable Collection is my bestseller, shipping to people all over the world who connect with its stories of quiet resilience and hidden truths. My income has tripled. I am successful by every metric Amelia ever cared about, but I've found that the numbers on the spreadsheet are the least satisfying part of the victory. The real victory is the peace. It's the quiet hum of the lathe, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the freedom of being the sole author of my own life, my own story. I am packing an order today. It's a custom piece from the Fable collection, a commission from a woman in Japan. It's a box carved with a single, resilient willow tree, its branches weaving together to form a protective canopy. It's a story of strength, of bending without breaking. As I place it carefully in a bed of wood shavings, I glance at my phone, lying silent on the workbench. I have no missed calls, no messages from my family. The silence used to be a wound. Now it is just a quiet space, a canvas. The end.